Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and in today's video I'm going to show you the aircraft that I did my commercial pilot license training on. This is the Piper Seneca V with turbocharged engines. Now, actually, I did my multi-engine training on two aircraft. The first was the Piper Seminole and then the Seneca. Now, unfortunately, the Seminole has been damaged halfway through my multi-engine training. Not by myself, by the way. And therefore I had to complete the rest of my training on the Seneca V. That was basically 6 hours of flying, and then came the CPL check. Now, in today's video I am using the Carenado Piper Seneca as an add-on, which is a very good looking simulation of the aircraft. Now, I'm going to show you a little bit about the aircraft itself, and I will also show you something of the multi-engine training that we did. Now, the very first couple of lessons in the multi-engine pilot training actually focus on flying a high-performance aircraft rather than the multi-engine effect, as in engine failures. Now, there is something in real life that most of you will probably not be very aware of coming from Flight Simulator, and that is that no two engines are the same. And that goes especially for aircraft which do not have an electronic engine control or a FADEC, such as the general aviation, or most general aviation propeller-driven aircraft. Now, we'll get to that at a later point. In this very video, however, we will first of all have a look at the general Seneca V. Now, we'll start with a walk around, having a look at the model, and from there on we'll transition into the cockpit, take it out for a small spin as we used to do in my own multi-engine training. By the way, if you're wondering, we are at Essen-Mülheim Airport over here, for which there is a great freeware available on the internet that I'm going to link in the description. And this is the airport on which I did my commercial pilot license training. So, we'll start with a walk around of the aircraft, starting up at the door actually. So we'll start at the aft door. Now, the aircraft has two doors. There is one more on the right hand side of the airplane from which the pilot can enter, and then there is one door in the back here where the passengers can enter. The airplane itself, the Seneca, is actually not designed as a trainer aircraft, but more as a cruising aircraft. However, in my personal circumstances, I got to do the training on the Seneca, which I was really glad for. We'll start over, having a look at the wings, having a look at all the screws and all the details over here. And this actually gives us a very good impression of the Carenado Seneca model as well. Note the high detailed screws and bolts and everything we see here on the wing. And that is something that Carenado have been famous for a long time, that they did they did and do very good models all over. Now, these two things you see on the leading edge over here are the stall warning systems. So basically, when the angle of attack, so the angle at which the wing cruises through the air, increases too much, these things are being pushed upwards, closing a contact, and that in return causes the stall warning system. Over here we have the light of the ice light, and then of course we have our engine pod here with it, of which we especially have to make sure that there is no oil dripping or anything like it. Overall, very good modeling here by Carenado. I'm looking really forward to see what it's going to look like in action. So, propeller blades, of course you check all three of them. Something that I personally always hated was that you actually had to check the leading edge of the propeller blades with your fingers. Now, of course, there are thousands of insects on those, so you basically have to wipe your fingers through all those insects. I hated that. Right, looking forward then. By the way, what is this? See this on the nose here? It looks like there's actually a small issue with the model here. Yep. Yeah, there is. Looks like the two halves of the airplane don't hit each other 100%. I mean, it's just a small issue. I'm actually seeing this for the first time right now, even though I've had the plane for 2 days already. Going on into the gear bay. Some good detail over here. Gear itself not damaged. We'll continue on the other end side, on the wings. Same details, of course, that we have to check for. Also, of course, down here, the actual fittings of the aileron. Making sure that all the static dischargers are in place. Now, up here is our step. From here you would step onto the wing, not onto the flap. It says no step on here as well. So from here onto the wing, then you can get forward to the flight deck door. And from there you would enter the flight deck. Back here, static ports. Checking all the antennas, making sure they are fixed well. Now, when you're doing the walk around in your commercial pilot's exam, chances are the instructor is going to ask you what all the respective antennas are for. But I'm going to cover the actual commercial pilot's exam in a separate video here. This is only the very first in a couple of videos I plan to do with the Seneca. Alright, so that basically concludes our walk around. Overall, we can say Carenado has once again delivered a very good model here. Small issue there on the nose, and well, the lining on the door here don't look particularly excellent, but nonetheless, you know, this is a general aviation aircraft. I wouldn't be surprised if the actual door just looked half a centimeter out of the whole fuselage. So, that basically concludes our walk around. Now, let's get down into the flight deck and actually do a little bit of flying with the Seneca. What I really liked about it was that you had one continuous windshield without that strut in the middle. Now this thing in front of you here, in case you're wondering, is an electrically heated part of the windshield because this aircraft is certified for icing for flight into known icing conditions. So this part of the windshield is heated, the rest is not. So over here you should not see any ice. The rest of it, you have a small overhead panel which contains basically parts of your electrical system, your batteries and alternators. Then you have the Magnetos, which are actually switches in this airplane. That is something I really had to get used to. You have the lights, and then of course the engine starters and the fuel pumps. From there on, the aircraft I flew actually had an Avidyne cockpit installed and not steam gauge's cockpit, but nonetheless, I think this is actually pretty good for doing some training flights over here, revising some of the basic IFR procedures and steam gauge navigation. By default, it comes with a GNS 530 and a 430. It also has a weather radar, which is working, by the way. I was really happy to see that it is actually working. It has the basic Aztec autopilot. Now, in real life, that autopilot was not very good. Let's see what it's going to be like in the Carenado. Now, in order for this to be good in the Carenado, it actually has to be as bad as the real one. So that's going to be an interesting challenge. And of course, we have a transponder and an ADF. Now, Carenado has also included that tablet over here that features a couple of options. So we can switch some static elements, external power, tow bar, and the most interesting one actually is this, which installs the GTN 750 in my aircraft. Also, we can choose a couple of panel states over here, and we have a takeoff checklist and the landing checklist. So let's stow the iPad again, and let's actually get to do some flying. My plan for this one is to take us off from Essen-Mülheim. We'll fly VFR over to Dienstlaken, Schwarze Heide. We'll do a touch and go over there. Maybe we will even shut an engine down and do a single engine touch and go. We'll have to see about that. And then we'll return to Essen-Mülheim for the full stop landing. That is something that we used to do very often in my flight school, because the landing fees here at Essen-Mülheim were just so high that it was cheaper to fly over to Dienstlaken, do our touch and goes there, and then come back to Essen-Mülheim. Alright, so Carenado did not include the checklists in this aircraft. in the InSim menu. However, they do provide 5 manuals and a copyright document. And in these 5 manuals you actually have scans of the real aircraft's flight operation manual, and if you want to follow along you can download those from the Carenado website. I am going to link it below, and over there you just go onto the documents, tap on the product page, and then you can download the manuals and have a look at them. I have to say though that the manuals are most likely scanned from the real aircraft, at least that's what they look like. It doesn't specifically say so in the introduction manual, but as said, that's what it looks like. Especially because Carenado did not model 100% of the systems. So if you don't know Carenado yet, they do some basic systems modeling within the scope of the simulator's internal systems, and then they do some slight modifications. For example, the turbochargers here are working, which I have not seen on default aircraft yet, and stuff like this. However, that also means that we do face some of the limitations of the default systems as well, which we are going to see soon. So, going on with it, I'm going to spare you the check of every single system while we are sitting here without power. But what is probably going to surprise you in the Seneca is that part of our checks are actually carried out without power applied to the aircraft, and you will only turn the battery on when you actually are about to start your engines. That is basically done to conserve some battery life and just to extend the overall battery life as well. Especially when it's cold, those general aviation aircraft tend to only have a very, very short battery duration, so we want to be sure that we are not draining the battery. So let's go on over here. The parking brake is set. That's the one down here. Landing gear lever is down here. Throttles, idle, propeller controls, full forward, mixtures, idle, friction handle. Now the friction handle is of course not simulated in the Carenado, since you basically can't adjust the friction of your real life hardware with that. Alternate air controls, here, up, cowl flaps, open. They're down here. Stabilizer and rudder trim. Have it down here. Basically set to the middle position for both of them. Then our fuel selectors down here. On and on. The heater switches, those are basically located down here, are off, and radio master switch, that one's up on the front panel, here is off. Electrical switches off, circuit breakers in. Now the circuit breakers are not actually simulated on this aircraft, but as said, the Carenado simulation is about flying the aircraft, not about 100% system simulation. Alright, so we'll go over to the general start of the engine using the cold start procedure. Now there are several different start procedures included in the manuals for cold engine, cold weather, hot engine, engine start when flooded, and engine start with an external power source. Now we are going to use the normal start cold engine. So throttles, 1 inch open, prop controls, full forward, battery master switch, on. Actually the alternators should be on at this point as well. Right, gear lights, 3 green down here. Standby fuel pump on. Magneto switches
clear
on.
prop.
And then mixture, rich, then idle cutoff. That is basically in order to prime the engine. So we're going to set the mixture to full rich. Now we should see a little bit of fuel flow over here. Unfortunately we don't. And then back into idle cutoff. Actually we did. Wait a moment. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Now have a very careful look at the needle down here. Yeah, there is a slight increase. Okay, so I gotta revert what I said earlier on. There actually is a slight increase, so you can prime the engines. Okay, prop area clear, starter engage. Now I'm going to read you forward through this. Basically, you engage the starter and you advance the mixture once the engine fires. Now, I've found that unless I slightly advance the mixture, the engine is not actually firing here, and that is probably a limitation of Microsoft Flight Simulator. But let's see how that works. We'll start with the left engine. The fin strobes are on, that's basically the beacon. And start left engine. You see nothing happens, and as soon as I slightly advance the mixture, the engine fires. So that's probably a Flight Simulator limitation, because Carenado has been using the default Asobo model. Okay, then let's go ahead and do the same with the right engine. So that's both engines started. Try to keep them below 1200 RPMs, better in the region of about 1000. But this aircraft needs very little throttle movement in order to change the RPMs, so be careful with that. You have some really powerful engines on the Seneca. Okay. Let's do the before taxi checks. Battery master switch is on, gyros are checked. Altimeters and clocks are checked. Altimeter, by the way, in this airplane features both millibars, which is the same as hectopascals, or inches. So you can use it despite if you're flying in the United States or elsewhere in the world. Alright, then radio master switch on, lights as required. I'll put the nav lights on as well. Heater and defroster, as desired, they're all off at the moment, so I'm going to keep them off as well. Fuel selectors, so on, check crossfeed. So they're both in on right now, you can see the engines are running. Now let's check the crossfeed position. The real aircraft leaves the engine running for about 30 seconds from the moment that you turn the fuel tank selectors into off, and then you can turn them to crossfeed. Now this one is shutting the engines down quite a bit earlier, basically after a second or two, so just make sure to scroll quickly on the lever. Here we are. Right engine and crossfeed keeps running, so the crossfeed is working. Let's do the same with the left engine. And also onto crossfeed, the engine keeps running. That's very good. Okay, and now you got it. If I put it on off, it quickly starts to go down on the RPMs, as you can just see. Now, the real one does take a bit longer, but once again, Carenado is using the default system, so blame Asobo, don't blame Carenado. Alright, and the engines are back on crossfeed here. So, radios checked and set. We basically won't need any radios for here. The autopilot is checked. Basically, on the real one, you would engage it, turn the heading back, see that it's moving the control column and stuff like that. In the simulator, we know that it's gonna work. Electric trim check. So first of all, I'm going to check that the switches on the control column are moving, which are basically those over here, and they do move, as you can see. Now we check down here that the trim wheel is actually moving as well in the corresponding direction. I'm just going to put those into the neutral position. That is all we need. Passage briefing complete, and then park and brake release. Now be very careful once you release a park and brake on this aircraft. It is going to start to taxi pretty quickly. Now, taxi light on, brake released, and here you go. You start moving straight away, and that is exactly what the real Seneca is doing as well. So that's very good from Carenado that they've actually modeled this. So we're going to go to runway 24 today. There's some very slight tailwind, but that is acceptable, and that provides for an easier traffic pattern later on. And most importantly, for a more exciting traffic pattern as well, in terms of outside visuals. You can see the aircraft starts to taxi pretty quickly, and that is all with the engines in the, well, technically not idle position, but in the position where you're supposed to have the engines on the ground. By the way, if you're too lazy to read the dials down here, you also got a digital version of the most important engine instruments up here, and on there you can actually also do some other stuff like checking the voltage, the amperage, checking how much fuel you have on board and how much fuel you have used. Now I just gotta slow down a bit. And information like that. Also, you have your thermometer over there, so it's 25 degrees outside, 23 in the cabin right now. Believe me, that is gonna change quickly, so let's try to get this airplane into the air to have some cooling. However, before we can do so, we have to carry out our engine run-up, so I'm going to put the aircraft slightly turned into the approach direction here. Park and brake set. Now, let's go ahead and do our run-up. And so we start with the park and brake set, mixtures, full ridge, prop control, full forward. So throttles 1000 RPMs, engine instruments check. I'm happy with the 1100 here, the engine instruments are all looking good. Then throttles 1500 RPMs, check that the prop is going to feather. Now that's actually where a smaller servo limitation comes in, because when we put those to 1500 RPMs like we do now, we pull the prop levers back, nothing happens. Well, they should go down, but, well, our servo limitation once again. Next up, put the throttles to 2300 RPMs, then we're going to exercise the prop control basically in order to pump a little bit of oil into the systems. So we'll do that now. Increase our thrust here, looking for 2300 RPMs. Easiest to do is just use the digital gauges up here. They're telling you exactly how many RPMs you have. Right, so we've got to pull back on the prop levers all the way to the feather position, but make sure that the RPMs don't drop by more than 300 RPMs. So basically, we have to prevent them from dropping that far ourselves. And remember, we always had to push the prop levers up forward manually as well to prevent them from going under the 300 RPMs. So let's do that. Number 1, number 2, and number 3. But it's a little bit strange. I've put the prop controls full forward again. Now, for a reason, they stay at 2,180 RPMs rather than going back to 2,300. I don't quite know why the Carenado is doing it, but I'm guessing it is related to the simulation of the supercharger in here, or the turbochargers. Anyway, now we are going back to check the alternate air. So we flick that on. We sort of should observe a drop of 25 RPMs now. That is not actually happening in here. No, I don't see any change. Okay, so throttle at 2000 RPMs, then we're going to check our magnetos. And the magneto check is actually fairly interesting in this airplane because you have the switches rather than the keys that most of you GA pilots are used to. So I'm going to show you that now because it requires you a little bit of thinking, of course, on what you're switching on and what that means, what is actually remaining. So we want 2000 RPMs, and I want those exactly, please. And here we are, 2000 RPMs. So we'll start checking the left magneto, so we're going to turn the right one off. Now the RPM drop should not exceed 150 RPMs, and there has to be a maximum of 50 RPM difference between the two magnetos and the two engines. Over here they're actually identical, so we'll turn the magnetos back on. Observe they are going back towards 2000 RPMs. Now let's do the same, turning off the left magneto. Well, that's exactly the same drop that we had earlier on. Alright, so finally gonna check the voltmeter to check the bus voltage. Check the vacuum pump down here. and from here on we'll go ahead, put the engines into idle, and then make sure that they actually keep running. So, as we're now approaching our takeoff, let's quickly explain the two ways we have to take off in this airplane, and the specials of the turbocharger. Now those are actually simulated by Carenado, which is rather nice. You see we have these green lights on the engine dials up here, on both the manifold pressure, the RPMs, and the TIT gauges, which by the way stands for turbine internal temperature. Basically, with the turbocharged airplane it's very easy to overboost on the manifold pressure as well as on the RPMs or the temperature. So we've got to increase thrust very slowly, increase our throttle very slowly, then make sure that everything stays within limits. In order to do that we have to hold our brake on the departure, which by the way you will see actually is required in the Carenado. Default takeoff is with the flaps in the up position, so we don't need any flaps for the takeoff, only if we want to do short field takeoff. For the normal takeoff we're going to advance the power to 38 inches and 2600 RPMs. Now interestingly enough, in the Carenado we already get the red warning light at 36 inches. So I'm going to use 36 to keep the green lights on for our takeoff. But you'll see that the airplane still has plenty of power. Rotation is at 79 knots and the initial climb speed after obstacle clearance is 88 knots indicated. If you were to do short field performance takeoff, it should be 25 degrees of flaps and rotate at 71 knots, and obstacle clearance speed is 73 knots, and only when obstacles are cleared you will retract the flaps, accelerate 88 knots for the initial climb. Now the maximum performance climb, best rate is at 88 knots, best angle at 83 with the cowl flaps full open and max continuous power. And once you are above a safe altitude you can turn the standby fuel pumps off. The cruise climb, which is the one we are more interested in because we want to cover some distance as well, is at 2500 RPMs at 32 inches and 110 knots with the cowl flaps about half opened. The standby fuel pumps can be turned off at a safe altitude as well. As a safe altitude I'm generally taking 400 feet above the field, so at 800 feet in our case. Now that basically concludes the departure information over here. So for the takeoff briefing we're going to use 36 inches, 2600 RPMs, rotate at 79, climb at 88, and once we're clear of obstacles, so at 400 feet, we'll set our climb thrust 32 inches, 2500 RPMs, turn off the standby fuel pumps and climb at 110 knots. We have a Class Charlie airspace overhead the airfield, so we cannot exceed 1500 feet until we are clear to the north, and the traffic pattern altitude is 1400 feet. Any questions? Alright, then transponder is on, we'll also put the lights on, and that is basically all we need. So let's go. And the P2E can go on as well. The Seneca is very sensitive on the controls, but the real one is as well, so that's perfectly simulated by Carenado. You will need very small control inputs. Okay, so we are going to stop here on the runway and then slowly set the takeoff thrust. I have a close look at the engine instruments. I'm going to zoom that in for you here. Or at least I would if my zoom keys were working. Here they are. Alright, so I'm just going to advance the thrust lever slowly here. You will see that the propeller easily tend to overturn. You just saw the red lights there. And if I just went full prop, I would overboost the engines as well. So we're looking for 36 inches. Easiest to see just on the digital instrument on the top, 2600 RPMs. That's what we need. Alright, brake released, off we go. You will need a little bit of rudder to keep the airplane on the center line, especially when you have some wind. That's entirely normal. So rotate. Come on. Here we are. Press the toe brakes before retracting the gear, and then gear up. I told you we're getting a very good rate of climb out of this aircraft. So 800 feet, that's going to be 32 inches and 2500 RPMs. We'll also start our right-hand turn already to stay in the traffic pattern. Over here you see a small graveyard. That's basically where we want to fly over, from where we can leave the traffic pattern. And level off at 1,400 feet initially. And off we go to the north. So, standby fuel pumps going off. The flight to Dienstlaken is very short. We're just looking at about, say, 10 minutes to get there. And the Seneca is actually cruising rather well. We're looking at approximately 160 knots true airspeed for this aircraft. So, cowl flaps to about half. That helps with the engine internal temperatures. So there's a railway line at some point to the north up here. We've probably passed over it already since the view outside is not that excellent. No, actually here it is. So once we're over the railway, we can climb above 1,500 feet. So basically now we're clear of the Charlie airspace. We'll go to 2,000 feet, that's really all we need on this very short sector. Once we're in cruise, let's have a look at some of the pitch and power numbers in the Seneca. That is something that Carenado has traditionally always gotten right in their products. The pitch and power values have always been spot on. So, the power setting table is of course included in the flight manuals that come with the product. So for an economy cruise below 20,000 feet, we're looking at 27 inches and 2,300 RPMs, or if we want to save some noise, 28 inches, 2,200 RPMs. So let's go for that. 28 inches and 2,200 RPMs. That makes it a bit more quiet. Basically for everyone involved. Alright. From here on we'll have to turn to the right a little bit. So there's one power station there, there's another one over here, so basically the airfield we're looking for is right in the middle between them. Should be a couple of lakes around, which we can see over there, and the airfield is just over here. So we can start descending to the traffic pattern altitude already. Told you this is a very short flight. By the way, I can see my former house up here. I actually lived in this area. Alright, so we'll start reducing our thrust already. 20 inches, we don't want to get too fast. And we don't want to let the aircraft get ahead of us. So cowl flaps can be closed in the descent to keep a little bit of the heat in the engines. Traffic pattern basically starts over here at the end of the forest. We go straight ahead to the street towards this industrial area over here, then make a left turn, don't overfly the road, and then we can turn to the final approach. Pattern altitude at 1,200 feet. We're going to do a touch and go. There are a normal touch and go. Thereafter we'll do a short field landing technique into touch and go as well. And then we'll see if we have the time for a single engine approach as well. Right, 1,100 feet, that's what we want to maintain. Let's pull a bit more power off, but we'll soon reach the gear warning horn. Yeah, here it is. Right, so flaps 1, that's really what you need to get the aircraft under control. Now let's turn downwind. This is the area we want to overfly, where we are going to turn base. Cowl flaps can go open again, we'll need those for our touch and go. Landing gear down. The runway is a 08 over there, 0826, we're going to go for runway 26. Now we'll turn base, don't overfly this road over here. Slowly start our descent, flaps 20. So for the final approach we're going to use 90 knots. So flaps full, and we have developed a noise saving technique over here, which is basically you turn the prop levers into maximum only when you're just about on short final. So now we've got to start our descent here. Let's hope I didn't overturn. It's rather hard to fly those visual traffic patterns for me in the simulator without the outside visibility that you have in the real planes. So, RPM prop lever is going to maximum now. If I overturned a little bit, that's what I meant. You just need the visibility that you have in real life. In virtual reality this is a lot easier to fly, but unfortunately I have not found a way to record out of virtual reality yet. So, on the final, idle thrust. Flare the airplane, and here we are. Flaps up.
Smooth one. That's what people pay for.
And back to full thrust gently. Rotate. Brakes. Gear up. Climb power 32 inches, 2500 RPMs. And we start the left-hand turn. Basically once we are across these farmers over here. Level the plane at 1,200 feet. And be sure to pull the power off. I'm just going to go right down to 20 inches and round about 2200 RPMs so that we don't get too fast in the traffic pattern. The Seneca really has a lot of power, so controlling that actually was the main part of the first flight I did on it, getting to grips with the multi-engine. Because as a student pilot you're only used to those small Cessna 150 or Katana motors, which really don't give you good rate of climbs or good speeds, so controlling this airplane in a situation like this is something totally new for the student pilot starting on the multi-engine rating. Right, so we are beam the field, flaps 10, gear down. This time, by the way, we will also switch our standby fuel pumps on. The cowl flaps are still open, and we're going to keep them open. Approaching that industrial complex over here. Turn base. Base again, almost along that road. Don't overshoot it. Now flaps 20. This time we'll do the short field performance landing, which is final approach at 82 knots. And when we're doing that, flaps full, we really have to be careful that we are not using, or that we are not pulling the power off too early, because the airplane will have a tendency to fall down by the time that we actually pull the power off. Oh boy, really overshot that one. Told you, I just need that visibility. Right, let's actually put our view up a little bit. This looks a lot better. So 82 knots makes it actually hard to see the runway ahead. But don't accelerate too far. Power off, flare. Here we are.
That's how you land an aircraft.
Flaps up, and there we go again. Set power, but don't do it too fast. You see we've just been overspeeding our props again. Rotate, brakes, gear up. Alright, the next one we're going to do with a simulated engine failure. So we'll put the right engine into idle. Actually, there is a specific power setting on each multi-engine aircraft for simulating a feathered engine. However, unfortunately, I don't remember that power setting for the Seneca, and I do not have the original flight manuals anymore. So I'm afraid I can't quite look that one up. So level at Patron altitude, 20 inches and down to 2200 RPMs. There's a small lake over here which basically tells us where the industrial complex is beyond the forest. In real life there is also a small tower on it which you can easily see and therefore use as reference. Unfortunately that one does not exist in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Alright, so here we are. Now let's take the right hand engine and we'll just put it into idle. Losing quite a bit of airspeed here, but the Seneca has very powerful engines, so controlling the remaining airspeed with just the left engine is most certainly possible on the real one. We'll see how good or not that goes on the Carenado. Because right now I have some difficulties holding speed and altitude at the same time. But that's probably because the engine is not feathered, so let's give it a bit more thrust on the right one. Now that I think about it, it's probably been around 12 inches or so. Oh no, 15 I think. But don't quote me on it. We'll use 15 on this one. So here we are. Of course, keep in mind this is still flight training, so we still can't overshoot the traffic pattern or something. Because technically speaking, we don't have the rights that we would normally have as an emergency with an engine failure in a plane like this. Alright, so gear down, flaps 1. Generally you want to minimize movement of the power, so we'll just put it at 25 inches, use flaps 2. Okay, we need a bit less. Actually might need idle thrust here. Yeah, we do. Okay, then turn left. Onto the final. Let's see if I'm overshooting again. Oh, this one it's looking better. We're going to keep the flaps at 20 over here. And usually we didn't do these single engine approaches into landings, but into go-arounds, so let's do the same here again. So go around flaps, setting thrust, flaps 1, positive rate, gear up. We'll get into the gear warning because the second engine is still in simulated idle. Let's go 88 knots, that should provide us the best climb. I always find it impressive how bad those twin-engine aircraft are climbing when you just have a single engine available. You can see we're getting about 300 feet a minute versus 1,500 if the other engine was operating as well. But that's just how it is. Okay, we're at safe altitude, flaps up. Alright, so basically we have survived. From now on we could climb up over here, so we'll consider this exercise complete. And also we don't want to run the other engine and take a thrust for too long, so let's take our second engine back and add some thrust. 32 inches, 2500 RPMs. And let's go back to Essen-Mülheim. Climb to an altitude of 2,000 feet initially, but we have to keep in mind that we have to descend early enough that we actually get to avoid the Charlie airspace. General heading from Dienstlaken to Essen is around about 165, so let's just fly about that. Overall, I have to say the Seneca is a very good looking aircraft. Very, very good looking aircraft. It flies really, really nice. As said, you only minimal control inputs. I'm going to show you my control column here, together with some of the movements. So just check this out. How little input I'm giving on the control column, and how big the reaction of the aircraft is to that input. If I'm actually giving full input, this is what it is doing. So you can see this airplane does have quite a bit of power under its hood. Let's just go back to 28 inches and 2200 RPMs, which was our econ power setting. Alright, 2200 RPMs with 28 inches. That should give us around about 22 gallons of fuel flow. So let's quickly have a look at that. Yeah, we're just above the 10 on both engines, so that's around about 22 gallons. So Carenado just got the numbers spot on over here. That's very good. So if Carenado is good at one thing, then it's getting the numbers from the flight manuals into the aircraft. Also, the visuals are looking very good. The system depth in the Seneca simulation, well, as said, that is more or less on a default system's depth, however with some slight enhancements every here and there, like for example the turbocharger simulation. Also we have the GTN 750 available, and on the next couple of videos we're going to go over some of the avionics and some of the IFR flying with the Seneca. In general, I do plan to give you a couple of videos of what we did in our commercial pilot training now that I have the Seneca available, and those will come over the next couple of weeks. Now, I do have quite some busy 10 days or so ahead with real life flying, so I can't promise you when those videos are going to be up exactly. Probably, I don't know, probably I will only be able to create them after those 10 days. However, I hope that you're actually enjoying this very first look over here, and I hope that you have enjoyed what I've showed you today. This was basically the first lesson that you do as a commercial pilot multi-engine student. So just getting to know the aircraft a little bit and just getting familiar with its handling characteristics, do a couple of touch and goes, do a little bit of en route flying, and start getting familiar with the procedures. Right, so we have our 4 buildings over here. That is basically an indication where the Charlie airspace starts the very latest. My flying club we always used to assume the highway over here. But those 4 buildings are where the Charlie airspace starts on the very latest. Coming back to Essen-Mülheim, we can very easily recognize the airport by this hangar we see over here, which is an airship hangar, and we can actually see that airship flying just over there. There it is. Part of the scenery, by the way, and not an artificial aircraft. So this is part of the scenery, and I really like it. The whole Essen-Mülheim scenery is a really good one, and the best thing of all, it's available for free. Now, come back into the traffic pattern, let's go flap 1 to reduce our speed a little bit. Something that you will notice is Essen-Mülheim is a very, very busy airport. So there will always be someone in the traffic pattern, and most of them are flying around about 80 knots in their Cessna 172s or equivalents. You are going to be a lot faster when you come in with a multi-engine, so you gotta be very careful with that. Alright, we'll turn downwind, that's basically over here, and we have a water tower over there, that green one, which basically marks the downwind. The runway is 06, so 0624 of course, so we'll turn 060 degrees and overfly the water tower. That is basically a good indication of the downwind. Gear down. Cowl flaps are full. The fuel pumps are on. And then our base leg is basically marked by this small forest over here. That's where we're going to go over. A little difficult to see in this aircraft, and that's always been the case in the real one as well. Normally our flight instructors would be looking out from the right hand seat here, and they would tell us when to turn base, because they can see a lot better from here. But here we go. Now we must not overfly this highway here. That means that we actually have a 45 degree angled base leg in between the base and the final. So let's go flaps 20, start pulling off a little bit power. We can basically continue this, and we fly along the highway over here until we get over those gardens we see down here, and then we'll turn final over there. And flaps full. We do have a PAPI available, and in real life the PAPI turns out really useful on this approach, but in Flight Simulator, with the given limitations of the PAPIs by Asobo, we will probably rather do that visually. So 90 knots for the approach. We'll have to vacate the runway almost at the end, so we can flare in a little bit if we want to. So probably with full thrust idle. Touchdown, right on the markers, very good. Got it back onto the center line. Basically we don't need any braking here, we can just let it roll to the next taxiways. So here it comes. Start braking a little. Now, you don't want to keep your engines in idle for too long, because these engines just don't like idling for a very long time, so just add a tiny bit of thrust, get them anywhere around 1000 RPMs, or between 1000 and 1200, Oh, we can see the airship approaching over there. That's nice. Right, so fuel pumps off, landing lights off, strobe lights back to the fin strobes only, which act as beacon in this aircraft. And the transponder goes into standby. So, here we are. Welcome to Essen-Mülheim. We'll taxi back all the way to the flight school hangar, and we'll park the aircraft over there. Oh, that's an interesting low approach by the airship. Also very nice to see that Antonov 2 over here. That actually stood in Essen-Mülheim really often in real life and is part of the static scenery over here. Now, parking the airplane, that's always been very interesting over here. Basically turn it into here. At least when there is no aircraft parked over here. And then you make a 180 at the end. Sometimes also with a little bit of braking in. So a little bit of differential braking. And that's it. Here we are. Now imagine 6 aircraft parking over here. Alright, so brake set. Then let's actually go ahead and just run our checklist again. So, clear of runway flaps, retract. Yeah, we could definitely do that. Cowl flaps, full open, they are. Air conditioner as desired, radar off. We kept it off all the time since the weather was good. Standby fuel pumps off. And strobe light off, landing and taxi light. Oh, we are parked by now. Off. Okay, to stop the engine, radio master off. And electrical equipment all off. Throttle, idle. Mixture, idle cutoff. Magneto switches off. Alternator switches off. Panel lights off. Battery master off. Alright, that's it. That's the very first flight in the Seneca. Hope you enjoyed this one. And if you did, please leave a comment, like, and consider subscribing to the channel. I have to say my first impression of the Carenado Seneca, by the way, is that it is very much in line with previous Carenado aircraft. So it provides a great looking model, both inside and out. The sounds are quite good, I have to say. They are not perfect, so don't expect 100%. Don't expect them to be 100% perfect, but they are sounding quite good, I have to say. And overall, flight dynamics do feel pretty good. Now, they are default flight dynamics, so don't expect anything fancy there. But it does fly very well within the scope of the default flight dynamics of the simulator. And the system simulation is pretty much what you can expect from Carenado if you know their other products. So it's default systems, but correctly tuned. They have the correct power tables in, they have the correct responses in for what can be simulated within the default flight simulator. I hope you enjoyed this one, and if you did, I would very much appreciate if you would leave a subscription at the channel, and if you really love the videos, I would love a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link below. Until then, let me know what you think of my idea of this series, of showing you some of the commercial pilot training aspects, and I'm looking forward to see you all on the next one. Thank you very much for joining, and have a good day.